Rainholder to the American Economy by Stephen Wu. J.P. Morgan, as he is commonly known as, full name was John Pierpont Morgan. His father, Junius Spencer Morgan, was already well known in the banking industry. His mother, Juliet Pierpont, was born of a reverend and influenced young Pierpont in religious beliefs. He would later be the head of many churches in New York City. He was born in Hartford, Connecticut on April 17th in 1837. For his college education, he went to the University of Göttingen to improve his German, graduating with a degree in art history. With his education complete, Pierpont worked at his father's firm, Peabody, Morgan & Co. Staying in the Peabody, Morgan & Co. firm, Pierpont moved to New York City, where he joined the firm of Duncan, Sherman & Co., which was the American representative of Peabody, Morgan & Co. After George Peabody retired, Pierpont's father renamed the merchant firm J.S. Morgan & Co. In 1871, 20 years after he enrolled in high school, Pierpont joined the firm of Drexel & Co. and became a partner of Anthony Drexel himself, renaming the firm Drexel Morgan & Co. After Drexel passed away in 1893, Pierpont's new firm was left with only himself at the helm. 2 years later, the firm was renamed J.P. Morgan & Co. Having renamed his firm, Pierpont still had significant ties with other firms such as J.S. Morgan & Co., Drexel & Co., and Morgan Harjays & Co. Once finished with renaming his firm J.P. Morgan & Co., Pierpont started to encounter problems that would drag many banks over a seemingly endless cliff. This was the Panic of 1893. This was also Pierpont's first test as a banker on his own. The panic was a result of the Baring Brothers, an agent bank from Argentina. After they had failed to corner the wheat crop in Buenos Aires, their investments were stopped. European bankers got concerned that those problems would spread to their own firms. They started a run on the gold treasury. Initially, people would trade in dollar bills for gold. The thing was, if the treasury was to put those bills out to the public once more gold would have to be used to put those bills out, thus making an endless drain of which gold would flow out of. As the amount of gold in the treasury dropped to an extremely low level, Pierpont, having grown his bank to one of the largest on Wall Street, suggested the idea that they could use stock syndicates to put gold back into the reserves from Europe. At first, the idea was rejected, for the idea of publicly drawing money into a government reserve was seemingly horrifying. But as the economy deteriorated, President Grover Cleveland finally agreed to the plan. Morgan entered the steel dome. He, however, was first approached by a man with the name of Judge Albert Gary. Gary, alongside John Warren Gates, rising manufacturer of barbed wire, wanted to combine a vast amount of smaller steel manufacturing companies into one $80 million American Steel and Wire Company. After joining the pool of companies, he later joined the Illinois Steel Company and Ore Company, and other companies to form what was known as the Federal Steel Company. As his dreams grew bigger, he put together National Tube Company and the American Bridge Company. Even bigger dreams were created. One that struck many quite spectacular. If they all combined the steel companies in America, they would become the leaders of the world power in steel production, being the only remaining world power, along with the bonus of the victory in the Spanish War. One thing stood in Morgan's way: Andrew Carnegie. Carnegie had created a huge steel industry that had used the assembly line a few decades before Henry Ford used it for car production. If Morgan somehow managed to get the white-bearded man to sell his company to Gary's Federal Steel Company, they would make the first billion-dollar industry in the history of mankind. Only they needed Carnegie Steel before such spectacular dreams could come true. One night, a date was set so that Morgan would meet not Carnegie but his accomplice, Charles Schwab, at the Hotel Bellevue in Philadelphia. He arrived only to find that Morgan was back in New York with a cold. Schwab, taking the night train, went back to New York and met Morgan upon his request. Once met with Schwab, Morgan told him his final proposal to buy Carnegie Steel. He also asked that Carnegie name his price. As Schwab went to Carnegie, he was unsure of what the multimillionaire would think of his proposal. He asked Mrs. Carnegie for some advice. Golf was one thing that got Mr. Carnegie into a more humorous mood. After several rounds of golf, the two men gathered for lunch. It was then that Schwab told Carnegie about Morgan's proposal. Carnegie put the price at $492,556,766. This was a huge transaction. After leaving the golf club, Schwab went back to Morgan, showing him the slip of paper. After just merely glancing at it, Morgan said, "I accept." The United States Steel Company was born. A second panic came and hit the U.S. economy worse than the ones before. This was the Panic of 1907. Causes for the panic came from a plan to corner the United Copper Company, owned by Augustus Hines. He started this business in Butte, Montana, and in 1906 he moved to New York City and formed a close relationship with Wall Street banker Charles Morse. Morse himself had already cornered the New York ice stock, and with Hines had gained control of 6 national banks, 10 state banks, 5 trust companies, and 4 insurance firms. Augustus's brother, Otto, made a plan to corner the United Copper stock. He believed that the Hines family controlled a large piece of the company. Otto proposed that he would buy up as many of the shares as possible. Once the price of the stock was sky high, the short sellers, the people who trade, buy, and sell on a daily basis, would have no choice but to turn to Otto for more stocks, who would then name the price to his liking. To finance this cornering, he would need Charles T. Barney, head of the Knickerbocker Trust Company, the 3rd largest in New York City. Morse had used the trust company to finance many of previous Morse schemes. This time, the amount that Otto needed was a lot more than what he had. Barney refused to provide the money. His belief that the Hines family owned a lot of the stock was the road to his downfall. Once he gobbled up stocks, the short sellers supposedly would have turned to him for more stock. No, this time the short sellers had turned to other stock providers, and his actions to corner the stocks had failed. The date was October 16th, 1907. Several days later, the New York Clearinghouse forced Augustus, Otto, and Morse to suspend all of their banking interests. The Knickerbocker president, Charles Barney, was forced to resign for his ties with Morse and Hines. People in panic started to draw out money from trusts all over the city. After 3 hours, more than $8 million was drawn out from the trust. This is where J.P. Morgan comes in. When the panic started, Pierpont was in Richmond, Virginia, at a church convention. It was October 19th when Pierpont arrived back at New York City. Soon, Morgan's library became a revolving door of New York City bank and trust company presidents arriving to share information on the crisis. Morgan and his associates examined the banking books of the Knickerbocker and decided that an effort to stop the run on the bank was unworthy. The Knickerbocker failure triggered even more runs on trust companies, making it nearly mandatory that Morgan help the city. On October 22nd, the president of the Trust Company of America asked Morgan for assistance. As another run started on the trust, Morgan worked with bankers James Stillman of National City Bank and George Baker of First National Bank to make the company's assets into cash so that they could pay the depositors. The trust nearly did not make it to the end of the day. Later that night, he held an assembly of presidents on the trust companies and held them at that meeting until they agreed to put loans of $8.25 million to allow the Trust Company of America stay open. On October 23rd, Secretary of Treasury George B. Cortelyou deposited $25 million into a vast number of New York banks. John D. Rockefeller, the richest man in America, pledged $10 million to Stillman's National City Bank. When the public still had not gained the amount of confidence that people wanted, Rockefeller then pledged half his wealth so that America's credit could stay afloat. After the Panic of 1907, Morgan slowly started to retire from active banking. He started to go on more extensive trips to Europe. He also showed a more intense interest in artwork. For instance, a trip to an art dealer. He glanced at a painting, asked the price immediately, found it cost $100,000, and bought it right there and then. But on one of his more elaborate trips to Europe, one that included Rome and Alexandria, Morgan fell ill. He returned to Rome, hoping he would get better. But on the morning of March 31st, 1912, the reign holder of the American economy passed away.